Curse of the Kichai Shaman. Chapter 15. The Coven Attacks. Diane, Richard, and Ethan were biding their time. This was the 4th day since they had paid for Venator's services, and it was Tuesday, the 3rd of October. At 7:35 p.m., Diane's burner phone rang. The voice on the other end spoke some words in Latin, and Diane responded in Latin some words of her own. It was Venator. He told her to write something down in code. She knew the same 3-alphabet code that he used in his notes. He talked slowly so she could code the message. He said, David Madure lives at 6421 Clearview Drive in Austin, Texas, with his wife Helene and 2 renters that rent a guest house. There were no dogs in the yard when I was there. He works at the Washington on the Brazos Historical Site most likely Monday through Friday and drives home to Austin on the weekends. I saw his truck up close at his work during the day and from a distance at the Comfort Inn and Suites at 9345 State Highway 6 at night. He then told her that that was all she needed to write down. He told her that if she needed help killing him, he could get Chris Folsom to help, but he would need $30,000 wired to his account. $15,000 was Chris's fee, and $15,000 was for Venator to make the plan. He said he already had an idea that would use Chris's skill as a former Green Beret sniper. Diane said, "1 second, and I will ask Richard." She told Richard that Venator had a plan using Chris Folsom and that he needed $30,000 to make it happen. She said she would split the cost with him. Richard said, "Remind me of who Chris Folsom is." Diane said, "He is a brother in Nergal and a former Green Beret sniper." This excited Richard, and he told Diane to make it happen. He would split the cost with her. Diane got back on the phone and told Venator that they wanted to use his plan and that she would wire him $15,000, and Richard would wire him $15,000 as soon as they got off the phone. Venator said, "Write this down in code. Pick up Chris Folsom at 79212 Acuff Road near Lubbock, Texas. Be there in 3 days on Friday, October 6th, and he will be expecting you. Drive Saturday to Marjorie Loverich's house at 16 Overlook Court in Georgetown, Texas. I will be there." He reminded her that Marjorie was a sister in Nergal and that they could use her house as a base of operations. He said if anything comes up to call him on his phone, he would be at Marjorie's house. Venator ended the call by saying, "Benedictus Nergal." Diane said, "Benedictus Nergal," and hung up. Diane, Richard, and Ethan then gathered at the dining room table and talked. They would need some supplies for a road trip. They would take Diane's 2020 BMW 5 Series Fastback because the police might be looking for Richard's Subaru. Ethan needed some more clothing, especially socks. They needed food and drinks for the trip. They decided they would go shopping in the morning. Diane got out her cooler and took it outside and washed it out with the water hose and left it upside down on the patio to dry. Richard got on Google Maps and found that it was a 23-hour drive from Sausalito, California to 79212 Acuff Road in Texas. Then it was a 6-hour drive from Acuff Road to Georgetown, Texas, where Marjorie's house was. They decided that they would drive 12 hours to Flagstaff starting early Thursday morning and would be spending the night at the High Country Motor Lodge. They would leave there early Friday morning at 4 a.m. and get to Chris's house at about 4 p.m. They would spend the night at Chris's house and leave by 6:01 a.m. and get to Marjorie's house in Georgetown, Texas by noon Saturday. Diane went online and prepaid for 2 rooms at the High Country Motor Lodge in Flagstaff, Arizona. There was a sense of excitement in Diane's house, like things were starting to move after being stagnant for almost 2 weeks. They all went to bed around 10 p.m. that night. Richard lay awake in bed for quite a while, thinking that he was going to finally kill David Madure. They were up by 7 a.m. that Wednesday morning. Diane cooked bacon, eggs, and toast for breakfast. After breakfast, they got in Diane's BMW and drove 45 minutes to a Walmart that was on the other side of the bay in American Canyon, California. They went in and shopped for quite a while. They got Ethan 2 shirts, 2 pairs of black jeans, a dozen pairs of socks, and a pair of black boots. They got a few loaves of bread, some packs of ham and turkey, a jar of mayonnaise, some plastic knives, paper plates, a pack of napkins, 3 12-packs of soda, and several bags of potato chips. They bought 2 boxes of 50 rounds of 9mm automatic pistol ammunition. They took the car to the auto center and got an oil change, had the fluid levels checked, and filled up with gas. After they were done at the Walmart Supercenter, they drove south to Vallejo and had lunch at the Napoli Pizzeria. Then they drove back to Diane's house. They brought their items inside. Richard put the lunch meat and mayonnaise in the refrigerator. Ethan put his new clothes, folded in a laundry bag that Diane had given him, and Diane brought the cooler in. She got a large picnic basket and put the loaves of bread and bags of chips inside it. Richard and Ethan got a camera bag from Diane and emptied the camera equipment out of it and put their handguns in it with the new boxes of 9mm ammunition. Diane brought them a .25 caliber automatic pistol and half a box of ammunition to put in the camera bag also. Richard and Diane took turns on Diane's burner phone calling their accountant. They each wired Venator $15,000. Richard did laundry, washing, drying, and folding his clothes, then packed them into his suitcase. Then Diane did laundry as well and hung her clothes in a hanging bag with shoes, socks, and undergarments thrown in the bottom of it. She also packed a small travel bag with toiletries. She gave Ethan a small, zippered pouch for his toothbrush, toothpaste, and shaving gear. Richard had a shaving bag that he had brought with him, and he got it ready to go. They went to bed early, just after dark. Richard woke up at 2:35 a.m. and waited until 3 a.m. to wake up Diane and Ethan. They had some eggs and toast for a quick breakfast and started packing Diane's BMW for the trip. Diane put the lunch meat, mayonnaise, and sodas in the cooler. Richard took the cooler out to Diane's car and put it in the back where they could reach over the seat and access it. They put the picnic basket in the back next to the cooler. They put their bags and suitcase of clothing in the back. They put the bag with the guns on the floorboard behind the driver's seat. By 3:45 a.m., they had the car packed and got on the road. They stopped in Sausalito at the Chevron and topped up the gas tank and got a bag of ice. Richard drove first. They went the speed limit to avoid any run-ins with law enforcement. They then drove until they came to I-580. They drove on I-580 for about 200 miles, then got on CA-58 for 90 miles. They had driven almost 4 hours before they stopped in Bakersfield, California, and filled up with gas and used the restroom. They got on I-40 and drove another 4 hours until they got to Kingman, Arizona, where they got gas and took a restroom break. Ethan took over driving, and about 4 hours later, it was 4:35 p.m., and they stopped at the High Country Motor Lodge in Flagstaff, Arizona, where they had prepaid for 2 rooms. They got some sleep and were at the hotel for about 9.5 hours. Ethan continued driving. They filled up with gas and were back at it at 2 a.m. that Friday morning. They stayed on I-40 for about 4 hours and stopped at Grants, New Mexico for gas and a bathroom break. They went on down I-40 for about 4 more hours until they got to Santa Rosa, New Mexico, and stopped for gas and a bathroom break. Diane took over driving and continued on I-40 for about 2 hours until they took US 84 for 2 hours when they took TX 289 and stopped in Lubbock, Texas. They filled the tank with gas and used the bathroom. Diane drove again, and they took FFM 40 to Acuff Road. They pulled into 7922 Acuff Road just before noon on Friday. There was a long private drive to a secluded farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. They pulled up outside the farmhouse that had an Army Ranger's flag hanging on the porch and were unsure as to what to do. Diane called Venator on her burner phone, and they went through the ritual of speaking Latin phrases to each other. She told him they thought they were outside Chris Folsom's house. Venator said he would call him, and he hung up. A few minutes later, a man came out of the farmhouse. It was Chris Folsom. They all got out of the car. Chris came up to each one of them and one at a time embraced them and said Benedictus Nergal. He was wearing a black military-style utility uniform with Special Forces patches on it. Chris invited them into his house. It was a small 2-bedroom house in a big open treeless field. Chris said Diane could use the spare bedroom and Richard and Ethan could sleep in the den. One of them could use the couch and one would have to sleep on the floor. In Chris's den, there was a big painting of Nergal flanked on either side by 2 different Army Special Forces flags. On the wall by the front door was a shadow box with badges, patches, and medals in it. Chris asked if they were hungry and said he had made some chicken and rice, so they all sat around a small table in a little dining area beside his kitchen. Diane, Richard, and Ethan ate while Chris talked. Chris was 46 years old and had never been married. He did not ever get any company over to his house, and he loved to talk. So talk he did. He told them that they did not need to worry. He said he could easily kill the man they needed to kill. He said he was a trained sniper and had an M24A2 sniper rifle and could hit a man at 1,000 yards. He then went into his bedroom and came back with a rifle case. He pulled out a bolt-action rifle with a black stock and telescopic sight. The rifle had a 5-round box magazine. He told them it shot 7.62 caliber by 51mm bullets that had an effective range of 1,500 yards, and that he was deadly accurate with it and had killed many enemies with this type rifle. He said he had been in Special Forces for 22 years and retired as a Master Sergeant in the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Special Forces Group. He claimed that he had done 4 combat tours of duty, 1 tour in Iraq in 2003, and 3 tours in Afghanistan in 2005, 2007, and 2010. He said he was in the Operational Detachment Alpha number 2313. He went and got his shadow box off the wall and started pointing at items in it and explaining what they were. He said he had a combat infantry badge with a star because he was in the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. He claimed to have won 1 silver star, 2 bronze stars, and 2 purple hearts. He showed them a scar on his leg that he said was from a grenade blast when he got his 2nd purple heart. He also pointed out his infantry blue cord, jungle expert badge, air assault badge, pathfinder badge, jump master badge, sniper badge, and army ordnance badge. He pointed to his 2nd Battalion patch, his 3rd Special Forces Group patch, and his Ranger tab and said he was 2nd in his class. He claimed that after he got out of the Army in 2015, he had worked for 2 years with the CIA on missions that were classified. He was confident and cocky. He acted like with his background he was better than everyone else. He said he would need a spotter for the killing. He asked if Richard or Ethan would volunteer. Ethan said he wanted to be there when the man that got his brother killed was killed and volunteered. Chris excused himself and went into his bedroom. He came back with a black utility uniform top and gave it to Ethan. He then went back into his bedroom and came back out with a compass and a set of binoculars. Ethan put on the black utility uniform top. He showed Ethan how to read the degrees on the compass and tested him by asking him to point to 85 degrees and 126 degrees, and Ethan was able to do it. He then went to his kitchen cabinet and got a white paper plate. He went to a kitchen drawer and got a permanent marker and a roll of tape. He took the marker and put a dot in the center of the paper plate. He told Ethan to come with him and grabbed his rifle and loaded 5 rounds in the box magazine from a box of rounds he had gotten out of the rifle case. On the way through the den, he grabbed a camouflaged blanket off of the back of his couch. He took Ethan out his front door and around behind his house. He went to a spot and put the blanket on the grass and set the rifle down on the blanket. He asked Ethan if he saw the mound of dirt about 100 yards away. Ethan said, "Yes." He told him that there is a post in front of the mound of dirt. He was to tape the plate onto the post with the dot showing. He gave Ethan the tape and plate. Ethan walked out and taped the plate on the post like instructed and walked back. Chris told Ethan to lay down on the blanket next to him with the binoculars and watch for the bullet strike and tell him if it was high or low or right or left. Chris laid on the blanket and Ethan got next to him and looked through the binoculars at the plate and mound of dirt. Chris took aim and fired a shot with the rifle. Ethan said he did not see anything. Chris adjusted the settings on the scope and took aim and fired again. Ethan said it hit the top of the mound of dirt high and to the left. Chris adjusted the scope settings again and took aim and shot. Ethan said it was low and to the right. Chris made further adjustments on the scope, took aim, and fired. Ethan said it was closer but still low and to the right. Chris once again adjusted the scope, took aim, and fired. Ethan said he hit the plate a little to the left of the dot. Chris said it was off a little because of the wind. He did not shoot any more practice shots and convinced himself that that was good enough. They packed up and went inside. Ethan's ears were ringing because he did not have any hearing protection. They went back into the house and Diane was on the couch saying a Latin prayer. When she finished, Chris said, "Benedictus Nergal." Diane was upset. It was almost 1 p.m., and she had missed her noon prayer and had recited it late. They sat around for the rest of the afternoon and into the evening while Chris told war stories. They went to bed early. Diane slept in the spare bedroom. Richard slept on the couch, and Ethan slept in a sleeping bag on the floor. They got up at 3:30 in the morning, packed up the car with Chris's backpack and rifle case. Then they went back inside, and Chris made scrambled eggs. They ate the simple breakfast and got on the road around 4 a.m. Diane was driving. She drove to US 84 and went on it for about an hour and 40 minutes. Again, they went the speed limit or less. She then took I-20 for 7 miles, then got on US 283. About 30 minutes later, she took US 84 for 30 minutes. She then took US 183 for about an hour and then stopped in Lampasas, Texas for a break and to get gas. Richard took over driving and he continued on US 183 for about 20 minutes, then took Ranch Road 2338 to Georgetown. They pulled into 16 Overlook Court in Georgetown, Texas at about 10:45 a.m. in the morning. Richard parked the BMW in the driveway and Diane called Venator on her burner phone. They both spoke the coded Latin phrases, and then she told him that they were in the driveway. Marjorie and Venator came outside and greeted them. Marjorie invited them inside and they began to unpack the car. Marjorie had a 5-bedroom house. Richard and Ethan would share a room. Diane would have her own room and Chris and Venator would share a room. Then Marjorie had her own bedroom. The 5th bedroom was used for storage. They rested for almost an hour. Then Diane said she was going to go out back and say her noon prayer. Marjorie was real interested, so Diane wrote out the Latin prayer so that Marjorie could recite it with her. After Diane and Marjorie were done with the noon prayer, Venator gathered everybody around the big dining room table so that he could outline his plan of attack. The first thing Venator did was confirm that Ethan was going to be Chris's spotter. Chris confirmed this as being correct. Venator handed Ethan a burner phone and gave Diane a slip of paper with the number. He told Diane to memorize the number and destroy the paper. Venator said that Diane would drive to Washington on the Brazos with Chris and Ethan and that Richard would stay behind with him. Richard protested, but Venator shut him down, saying that he would be a liability because David knew who he was. Venator gave Diane a paper with driving directions on it that she would take to Washington on the Brazos. The directions took her around on Highway 6 by College Station so that she would approach Washington on the Brazos on FM 1155. Venator gave Chris a handheld GPS device that had several locations pinned into it. Venator got on his laptop and showed Chris, Ethan, and Diane the pinned locations on the satellite view of the area of the Washington on the Brazos historical site. He said that Diane would let Chris and Ethan out at a culvert where Washington Cemetery Road 100 meets FM 1155. He said the road will be on the right, and she was to drop the men off on the left at the culvert. He said not to worry, that he would take Diane and Chris on a road trip there tomorrow, which was Sunday. Venator said that once Chris and Ethan were dropped off, that they would head east-northeast at 6712 degrees on the compass for 1/4 mile to the spot pinned on the GPS device, and then turn southeast at 135 degrees for about 100 yards to the next pinned position on the GPS device. From this position, Chris was in a direct line of sight to the Hatfields Exchange dig site from the wood line. Venator told Diane that after she dropped Chris and Ethan off, that she was to go to the public parking lot at the Washington on the Brazos historical site and to call Ethan if she saw any cops. Venator said that it would take 20 minutes for the sheriff's deputies to arrive, so he had to hit David with one shot and exfiltrate the area immediately. Diane was told that when she heard the shot to wait 10 minutes and then drive to the culvert on FM 1155 and pick up Chris and Ethan. Venator said he had walked the distance, and it took him 13 minutes walking quickly to get to the culvert. Diane would pick them up and be gone 7 minutes before the deputies would arrive. Richard was upset that he was not going to get to kill David, and it showed. He was angry at Ethan because Ethan was going to get to be there. For the rest of the night, Richard treated Ethan harshly. The next day, Venator, Chris, and Diane went out in Diane's BMW. Diane followed the directions that Venator told her. He had her stop in College Station to get gas. He told her to do the same thing Monday. They eventually got on FM 1155. Venator told her to pull over on the right at the culvert, and once traffic was clear, to do a U-turn and pull just past the culvert to a small ravine that was lined with brush. Venator told Chris that this was the spot where Ethan and he would be let off and picked up. If they got to the road early after the shooting, they could hide in the ravine until Diane arrived. Venator told Diane that it would be easier to pick the guys up because she would be on the right side of the road and would not need to turn around. Diane pulled out onto FM 1155 and did another U-turn like she would have to the next day on Monday. They pulled into the Washington on the Brazos historical site and parked in the public parking lot in a spot where Venator told Diane to go to. They got out and the three of them walked the old Washington town site loop trail. They came around where you could see the sign for the Hatfields Exchange site. They could see the canopies over the dig site and screening area where David worked during the week. Chris took the GPS device and went to the spot where Venator had put a pin in the device. He stood there for a while and looked around. It was just inside the wood line. He walked back 100 yards to the next pin on the GPS device and checked out the route he would take to get there and to escape on Monday the next day. He was satisfied and came back to Venator and Diane. They went back to Diane's BMW and left the historical site and drove to Marjorie's house in Georgetown. They were gone just over 4.5 hours. Diane had written down the time as she came to each place they had driven that day. Venator then sat down with Chris and Ethan at Marjorie's dining room table. He opened his laptop computer and went onto YouTube. He went to David's old YouTube channel, and they watched his videos. They watched until they were both familiar with the way David looked. That night, everyone was in high spirits. They were laughing and talking about how David Madure would soon be dead. They kept telling each other, "We killed him." Everyone was excited except Richard. He was still upset that he was not involved in the plan. He had stopped talking to everyone in the house. They were going to go to bed at 10:30 p.m. because they were supposed to get up at 6:30 a.m. and leave at 7 a.m., but nobody could sleep. They ended up staying up past 1 a.m. in the morning. The next morning, they managed to get up on time. Diane wore normal-looking clothes because she was going to be sitting in a public parking lot. But Chris and Ethan wore black jeans and black utility uniform tops. They brought regular shirts to change into after the killing. Chris's utility top was emblazoned with Special Forces shoulder patches. Ethan got his Glock 9mm pistol ready with a full 15 rounds in the magazine that was in the gun and carried 2 more magazines in the pocket of his black utility top. Ethan then tucked the Glock 9mm in his waistband because he did not have a holster. Ethan loaded Chris's camouflaged blanket in the car. Chris loaded his rifle's box magazine with 5 rounds from a box of 20. He then put the 15 rounds still in the box in his pocket, along with another full box of 20. He then said, "These are just in case because I only need one." They took a small cooler that they got from Marjorie and put some sodas in it. Diane sat in the car and took time to say her morning prayer, and they left. Once on the road, Diane did the speed limit and they drove the prescribed path until they got to the Bryan College Station area. They then stopped and filled up with gas and used the restroom. They got onto FM 1155. Diane and Ethan were nervous, but Chris was sweating. Diane drove a little past the culvert where she was supposed to drop off Ethan and Chris. She pulled off to the right side of FM 1155 and then waited for a car to pass, then pulled a U-turn and stopped by the culvert. The two men got out of the car. Chris had his sniper rifle tucked under his arm, and they ran down into the brush that covered the sides of the ravine next to the culvert. Diane then pulled another U-turn and got back onto FM 1155 and continued to the Washington on the Brazos historical site and pulled into the parking lot in the position that Venator told her yesterday. Everything was set. The killing was going to take place, Diane thought to herself. It was 9:25 a.m. when Diane checked the clock in the car.